Warmed by the cheating Irish. The air is moist and soft. All in all, farewell. Era has the advantage of living with all without and none of them where my case become really
He had not even a house
the
and the walls and the
average
walls
will resonate and I tried to my word of honor.
is the
This week I was getting Ireland, or rather Era, is a different story. It is thrust out into the Atlantic and its western coast, with its rivers and estuaries and precipitous headlands of limestone and granite, is warmed by the Gulf Stream. The air is moist and soft, and the land eternally green. Era has the advantage of living in 3 dimensions of time at once, and none of them can become the subject for acrimony between an American and an Irishman. The average well-read native you meet is at heart an archaeologist, for his island is well supplied with ruins that go back to what is known as prehistory. History in Era begins about the time of St. Patrick's arrival in the 3rd century, and the ancient round towers, remnants of castles, monasteries, abbeys, and churches attest to the perversity of invaders' arrival and local kings long before Lord Essex and Cromwell tried to put an end to Irish obstinacy. Modern history begins, and sometimes one thinks ends, with the Revolution. The Irish are born conversationalists, and their liking for Americans is at once obvious and delightful, whether it is an old lady coming out of her thatched-roofed cottage door, or the man in the dark little pub who might have stepped out of one of Synge's plays for a drink of ale or whiskey. You can get along splendidly in Era unless you believe that Ulster should remain attached to the crown. It is a country you can walk in with pleasure in a dozen or more counties. It is a land designed by nature to produce wits, saints, poets, writers, and orators. I proved that salt water is all over the world. There are women who are to break with their husbands, or the man in the dark such women I would say in all seriousness. What are you giving it? You can get along splendidly, or is it assaulting each other? Good soup is possible, it is a country you can walk to. In the lavish days, I don't think the Ilan is one that
During the ceremony, the Lord Lieutenant opened the door of one of the outdoor dens, and 5 young lions were turned out to gain their first experience of the open-air treatment and their first view of the beautiful gardens in which they reside. After the opening ceremony, 1,700 members, guests and military officers attended a garden party. Naval officers from the German fleet anchored off Dunleary added colour to the occasion, although Prince Henry of Prussia, a guest of the Lord Lieutenant, chose to play polo rather than accept the invitation of the Zoo Council. For the lions and other carnivores that were transferred to the new house, the accommodation was an improvement to their old lion house, with much better light and better ventilation. The cages had curved bars overhead and glass in the roof of the building, allowing sunlight to filter in towards the animals. MacDonald had gathered information about the carnivore houses in Europe and America, and had used the design of the lion house in Zoologischer Garten in Berlin. For some of the internal detail, there were 10 indoor dens and 1 large and 2 smaller cages outside. MacDonald devised a system to ensure that the animals could move from one part of the house to another, from indoor cages to outdoor cages, and to safe zones that staff could clean cages.
You may be wondering, Irish
I proved that salt water is all over the world. There are women whose hearts are breaking because their husbands
was a man and started to make all of our martyrs look at it. Such women, I would say in all seriousness, what are you giving them? To get along, splendid things, or is it just salt each other? Good soup is possible only if you have a good it is a country and walks with in the lavish days.
Once, before I got sense, I fell madly in love. I was so taken up with brooding that I had neither time nor energy for such ordinary occupations as eating and sleeping. My cheeks and eyes went in, and my collarbones came out. All in all, I was in a fair way to qualifying for a straitjacket, or a wooden overcoat, or both. When my case was becoming really desperate, I appealed for help to a friend who was given his life to the study of love potions and their antidotes. He advised me to drink plenty of salt water. I tried his prescription. On my word of honour, it worked. Within a week, I was able to meet the order of my misfortunes, without quivering like an aspen. Better still, I was able to look with a cold and critical eye on those little peculiarities of person and habit, which until then had made him seem so utterly adorable. Within a fortnight, I was sleeping around the clock, and before the cure ended, I had as good an appetite as could be expected of a woman whose insides have been in pickle for the best part of a month. You may be wondering what my unhappy love affair has to do with the making of soup. It has everything to do with it. I proved that salt water is fatal to love. All over the world, there are women whose hearts are breaking because their husbands have grown inexplicably cold. To such women, I would say in all seriousness, what are you giving them in a soup plate? Is it really soup, or is it just salt water? Good soup is possible only if you have a supply of good stock. In the lavish days of old, when they used to press the juice from the whole ham or make gravy for roast fowl, and then cook was allowed so much cooking jar that she could bathe in it if she felt so disposed. It was believed that you couldn't have soup unless you kept a perpetually simmering cauldron in which legs of mutton and beef, haunches of venison, flocks of fowl and game, and entire market gardens were coaxed into yielding up their succulence. Those are the days when life was supposed to be simple. Well, politicians and economists may be finding today's life more complicated. But for us cooks, it is certainly simpler. Nowadays, we are glad to accept as good stock the water in which have been cooked such things as bones, vegetables, and vegetable parings, and the trimmings from cooked and uncooked meat.
While the images they produce are undoubtedly, for example, they concern their contributions to
not even a house. The walls and the
Collectively, they had repeatedly stated that they knew nothing or virtually nothing about Ireland before they arrived, and that their knowledge of the peripheries of continental Europe extended as far as Britain. Van Velsen, for example, recalls having some preconceived images of Ireland, which were formed by a collection of National Geographic magazines at KLM's offices, where he noted the differences in landscape and architecture, specifically ruins and round towers between Britain and Ireland. Once established in Ireland, they extensively and regularly toured the countryside, using both still and moving cameras to document and record those aspects of Ireland and Irish life that for them exemplified difference and which they had used as source material to inform their work for various tourism agents. What is consistent in their individual testimonials is that a shared interest in the landscape and social practices formed a collective consciousness that they were outsiders observing and recording patterns that were in the process of being challenged or eroded. While the images they produced are undoubtedly informed by a romantic attachment to their adopted home, Their subjectivity is not fueled by discourses of collective, disparate memory, or explicitly tinged with the nostalgia that is so apparent in other Irish tourism ephemera produced for the US market. Thus, for this community of emigres, Ireland provided an antidote to their negative experience of modernity on a number of levels, and their work reflects a greater complexity of issues beyond that of providing the antithesis to urban environment that other visitors or tourists allegedly seek.
Civil culture is culture conceived.
You may be wondering what my on-hand level for
Installations. Is it art or not? On Monday night there was an invitation-only gathering in the Douglas High Gallery in Trinity College, Dublin, for an installation entitled A State of Great Terror. I regret to say that I emerged from the event in just such a state, fearing that this is the direction in which art seems to be headed. Installations are the latest vogue, and most modern galleries seem to be staging them. But too often, one has to wonder about the actual artistic value. Is it a case of fearing to be thought a Philistine by asking such a question? Is the yardstick, if you don't know what it means, it must be art? It is not the diary's job to be an art critic, and I speak only as a person deeply interested in art and literature and a member of the public who pays taxes to contribute to supporting the arts. A State of Great Terror is an installation of video, slide and sound purporting to explore the phenomenon of the millennium. The importation of millennium beliefs in contemporary political scenarios, the European Union, the promise of 6 billion, the threat underlying the appeal for explicit consent in recent referenda, blah blah blah. More effort seems to have gone into the description than to the event itself. Without wanting to sound cruel to aspiring young artists, I can only express with no little frustration my own befuddlement at what masquerades under the term art. To me, the installation in the Douglas High Gallery is nothing more than a pretension. It has been created by Blue Funk. There were no names on the press release to tell you who they are, and frankly, I have no desire to know. They were invited by the gallery to stage this installation, having had several previous shows since they came together in 1990 with the aim of facilitating time-based artwork. Briefly, A State of Great Terror is in a darkened gallery with 4 scenes projected onto screens and 2 television sets showing animated scenes. One shows a person's eyes blinking, behaving as an eye normally does. However, it was filmed upside down. That makes it art.
The arts and cultural processes, the logic of passive consumption implicit in English literacy. One of the effects of neoliberalism in Ireland has been partial investment in social development. One of the effects of neoliberalism in Ireland has been partial investment in the social development, alongside gross increases in the cost of living and wage gap. Unlike the United States, where inequities accompany demands for massive cuts in social spending, including the elimination of public housing from New York to Los Angeles. For many advocates of neoliberalism in Ireland, the regeneration of public housing in the Dublin community of Ballymun is understood in terms of property, investment and gentrification brought on by Ireland's tiger economy. But for residents, the benefits of coming to Ballymun have been made possible as a result of 40 years of community activism and organising. This dynamic local struggle versus global changes, grassroots, organising versus institutional cooperation has created a situation that Ultra Red has named the debt.
Civil culture is culture conceived of just the value of process of creation, rather than merely the product received for the understanding of the artist. The idea of participatory emancipation and resulting empowerment has an intrinsic artistic production and blend. This fact has, however, the spirit and the values of
In 1947 also, he first visited Dublin for a week during August. He stayed with the Watsons in Clontarf. Helen Watson, then the bursary secretary in Trinity College, Dublin, knew him through her sister. The latter had taught in Jamaica and also knew David Hendricks and his mother there. She had contacted him in London in the summer of 1947 and invited him to stay. After the first visit, David Hendricks liked Dublin sufficiently to come and study economics and political science in Trinity College, a course which began in October 1950. He already had several acquaintances who were involved with the visual arts, painters like Barbara Warren, Patrick Pye, and Patrick Pollan, who met once a week at Rice's pub on St. Stephen's Green. Like his landlady, Mrs. George Matty O'Connor, who lived in 3 Hampton Road, he was a fanatical bridge player. They became close friends, and it was she who first introduced him to the Dublin Arts Club. He also met Gordon Lambert through Mrs. O'Connor's friendship with the latter's family. Towards the end of 1952, as the Lamberts needed a 4th person to play family bridge, he rapidly became friendly with them. Lambert was also friendly with Barbara Warren, who had first taught the fundamentals of painting to Cecil King, who himself became a gallery artist in 1959.
For many adults, neoliberalism for generations, no reality is such representation is understood in terms of sharing contact, gentrification, brought on by Ireland's every good for residents, the benefits of coming to Ballymun have been made possible.
All over the world,
In the lavish stage that this dynamic allows for grassroots and organising so much Dear Barbara, I enclose a price list of the works included in the exhibition Hands by Nigel Rolfe, which continues at the gallery until 12th of March. No doubt you have seen the installation at the Douglas Hyde Gallery, but as you will see from the enclosed list, the work in this show are more individual and of gallery dimensions. I am sure you will find them interesting, and I hope you will find time to see them. I enclose a catalogue of the Douglas Hyde show, as 2 of the works in this show are reproduced on pages 21 and 22-23. With kind regards, sincerely, Oliver Dowling.
One evening I was walking along Hollywood Boulevard, nothing much to do. I stopped and looked in the window of a stationery shop. A mechanized pen was suspended in space in such a way that as the mechanized roll of paper passed by it, the pen went through the motions of the same penmanship exercises I had learned as a child in the 3rd grade. Centrally placed in the window was an advertisement explaining the mechanical reasons for the perfection of the operation of the suspended mechanical pen. I was fascinated, for everything was going wrong. The pen was tearing the paper to shreds, and the splattering ink was all over the window and the advertisement, which nevertheless remained legible.
Without a commitment to a participatory culture, it will finally not be possible to sustain democracy. But civil culture, art is culture belongs to shaped by multitudes, art is produced and distributed and understood after participation and expression. Civil culture is culture conceived of as a relation.
As I was walking down Curb Street, the creative community have never had it so good. Anyone who's taken a walk down the new curved street in Temple Bar will notice the appearance of two new establishments. Art House, situated on the southern concave side of Curved Street, is a multimedia centre which has been operational since the latter half of last year. At a cost of approximately $4 million, it was financed by the European Regional Development Fund and the Department of the Environment. Art House intends to provide a wide range of facilities for the artistic community and at present is compiling a computerised database of contemporary Irish art. The building also accommodates a multi-purpose production unit, a mezzanine internet cafe, conference seminar rooms, and there will shortly be a wide range of training facilities, concentrating on electronic media and advanced communications. Opposite Art House, and mirroring its postmodern design, is the soon-to-be-completed Music Centre, brainchild of Ormond Multimedia Centre's Paddy Dunning and owned by Temple Bar Properties. It hopes to be up and running by next month and will house the offices of Music Base, an information and advisory service for the industry, Temple Lane rehearsal and recording studios, as well as a fully licensed venue with a capacity for up to 600 people. The complementary design and proximity of Art House and the Music Centre raises the possibility of staging joint events. Either way, both projects are ambitious undertakings, which will hopefully enhance the creative community's output.
The idea of participatory innovation is inherent as argues an intrinsic artistic principle of learning. This fact has, however, been obscured and devalued in the 19th century Modernist mindset. Passive consumption is the way that most people now value themselves, and the psyche of passive consumption is a mindset that tends to commodify all human actions. The arts and culture process is contribution. The logic of passive consumption and commodification is implicit in the modern phenomenon.
Artur. Exactly. I don't think this is an honest and good message from a scientist, because it's a typical procedure in science that experiments should be repeated to check the results. But he said no. I think an experiment like the Stanford prison experiment is not neutral in how it functions. So that is why we as artists have to challenge the kind of knowledge produced by science and produce a kind of opposite knowledge. Liz. I am interested in why this participant was unhappy. Was he the one of the prisoners? Artur. Yes. Liz. He was the prisoner who collaborated with the guards and shaved the other prisoners' heads? Artur. He felt really bad, I think, because of this. Liz. He felt bad, okay? I suppose when you let these situations unfold, they tend to show human behavior both good and bad, and it's how you manage that. Artur, I am also interested in this notion of art's perceived autonomy. Your text challenges this very notion. You suggest that art needs to abandon this claim to autonomy it has fought so hard to gain. Understandably, artists have struggled over the years to avoid being appropriated by the state, as seen during the Nazi regimes and communist regimes. Yet you argue in your text that this autonomy and independence from other discourses has isolated art from reality. Can you talk a bit about this?
In mid-19th century Europe and America, the mass production of printed materials began to allow artists to both manufacture and distribute items widely, at a low cost. In the period immediately following World War I, 1914 to 1918, the role of ephemeral materials in art practice gained in importance as artists began to use the found object as a rejection of the elitist art object, and the deployment of common industry produced materials heretofore regarded as functional, pedestrian and without aesthetic value, coincided with a shift away from the importance of traditional gallery space. The members of the international art movement, Dadaism, established centres of creative activity in Zurich, Berlin, Cologne, New York and Paris between 1916 and 1924. The Dadaists produced highly conceptualised artwork using second-hand and low-quality materials constructed without concern for their actual physical longevity, but rather for the endurance of the ideas upon which they were based. The work of the Dadaist was displayed in makeshift exhibition spaces advertising and documenting these events with inexpensive mass-produced posters and exhibition catalogues. The vast majority of the original pieces listed in these catalogues have not survived, but much of the supporting documentation by virtue of the sheer volume and the wide distribution of the materials has found its way over time into archives and libraries throughout the world. The International Dada Archive at the University of Iowa holds a collection of 55,000 titles of works by and about Dadaist, over half of which are ephemera such as pamphlets, flyers, broadsides and correspondence.
The idea of participatory motivation results in encouraged problems and arguments and intrinsic artistic.
We believe that there is a need of a wider survey of contemporary Irish art than has hitherto been made. We are aware that there is a public demand to this effect. Therefore, we have constituted ourselves a committee to organise the Irish Exhibition of Living Art, in order to make available to a large public a comprehensive study of significant work, irrespective of school or manner, by living Irish artists. The exhibition will be held in the galleries of the National College of Art by kind permission of the Department of Education from September 16th to October 9th, 1943, inclusive. You are invited to submit not more than 5 works, which in view of the special character of this exhibition, the committee hope will be recent and important examples of your work. Every entry must be delivered unpacked at the National College of Art, Kildare Street, Dublin, on the 27th of August 1943, and should conform to a high standard in presentation and framing. Entries must be accompanied with an inclusive hanging fee of 10 shilling, which will be refunded if all work submitted by considered unsuitable for hanging. A commission of 12.5% will be charged on sales and deducted from the amount payable to the artist. The committee will be glad if you indicate your acceptance of this invitation by signing the enclosed preliminary form and returning it before July 20th to the Honorary Secretary, when an entrance form will be sent to you in due course. The Honorary Secretary, 42 Garville Avenue, Rockgar, Dublin.
The logic of classical modification exists in the modern and this suggests that English
What is art system?
to revenge wardrobe to modification of the work of heirs and one of the dogs and the land. Whether that was the case or not, there are consumer models now being read again or finding modern norms, inevitably represented as slavery body
While the images
the
The term Virginians refers to a traditional social role in the Balkans, that of men who were born females. These examples can be found in Bosnian, Serbian, Montenegrin, Croatian, Greek and Romanian minorities. Virginias enjoy great privileges in comparison to those living as female. They can do things that only males are allowed to do. For example, they can smoke, use tools such as guns and knives, and participate in events reserved solely for men, play certain instruments that only men can play as well. They generally obtain respect the way any other men would, but they are forbidden to have sexual encounters with any other person. In many cases, the biologically born women stop menstruating and start growing facial hair, such as a beard or moustache. For a long time, I have been very fascinated with this phenomenon, and I would like to go to Montenegro and Albania, where some of them still live today. Similar to the Balkan erotic epic and my prior work with Balkan men and women, I plan to make a film about the Virginias, focusing on virgins from the Montenegro area who have never performed before the camera, which will be based on a larger project about women warriors. Dressed in their national costumes, using traditional weapons such as knives and swords, I will stage a battle between the bearded virgin warriors and the bearded warrior men.
One of the effects of neoliberalism is isolated in partial investment in social development centres alongside grocery awareness and cost of living debate and personal reality. Unlike the United States, where companies heavily demands philosophy in social development, including coordination for many advocates of neoliberalism in Ireland, for the generations all over the world, the community of Ballymun is understood in terms of brought on by Ireland's Tiger Company. For residents, the benefits of coming to Ballymun have been made possible by community activism before I launched this dynamic local struggle versus local change.
Cavan County Council, post of Visual Arts Coordinator. Are you the person to lead development of visual arts in County Cavan? Cavan County Council invites applications for the post of Visual Arts Coordinator to work in the county for the period of 12 months. A successful candidate must have ability to select visual artworks, commission work and curate exhibitions at local authority venues throughout the county. Implementation and running regular training workshops in at least one area of the visual arts. Liaise with many diverse audiences including artists, community groups, arts organisations and the public. In addition, the successful candidate will have a good working knowledge of social issues and be imaginative in designing visual arts programmes that address social inclusion whilst also maintaining artistic quality. A qualification in visual arts, arts administration, arts appreciation or history of art is desirable. For full details, the job description, please contact Personnel Section, Cavan County Council, Courthouse, Cavan, telephone number 049 433 1799, with whom completed application form and curriculum vitae must be lodged by Friday, the 17th of August 2001. Cavan County Council is an equal opportunities employer. S. Neely, Director of Services.
I tried to balance, but my word of honor was which we know we find
Man is the only animal who makes pictures. All over the world, primitive man, when he has killed his meat and won a little leisure, squatted down with a charred stick or a sharp flint in his fist to take stock of his emotions, to publish his sense of the importance of his own personality, to manifest his kinship to the Creator by some act of creation. He had not even a house at the time. On the walls and roofs of his dim-lit caves in Almeria or Lacau, he drew and painted the deer, the bison, the wild boar, the hunters and women of his tribe. He did this to assuage a craving of his human nature. In so doing, he told us almost all we know about his feelings and his way of life. For art is man's most truthful and intelligible monument. Thomas Davis scarcely exaggerated when he said, "Art is biography, history, and topography, taught through the eye." Pictorial art is the only universal language. Its limits are the limits of experience. It embraces within itself all the forms of nature and omits only their names. Forms are universal, names are accidental. A hieroglyph for a bird is universally comprehended. Write bird, osso, uccello, or vogel, and you limit your message to one people at one period. Write a little bird picture, and all mankind can read your meaning in a flash.
You may be wondering what my unhappy level of all over the world, there are women who
Without a commitment to a participatory culture, a truly civil culture, it will finally not be possible to sustain democracy. By civil culture, I mean a culture belonging to and shaped by its citizens, one with which art is produced, distributed, and understood as an act of participation and expressive emancipation. A civil culture is culture conceived of as a relation of negotiation in the process of creative production, rather than merely as products received in the act of consumption. The idea of participatory emancipation and resulting empowerment has, I would argue, been intrinsic to artistic production for millennia. This fact has, however, been obscured and devalued in the 19th and 20th century modernist mindset. Passive consumption is the way that most people now gain purchase on value and status in society, and the psyche of passive consumption yields a mindset that tends to commodify all human experience, the arts and cultural processes in particular. The logic of passive consumption and commodification is implicit in the modernist promise of offer, and this, suggests the English literary critic John Kerry, is a revenge of the bourgeoisie of the emancipation of the working classes in the 19th century. Whether that is the case or not, the fact is that the consumer model of citizenship, which is now being bedded down as the defining model in Ireland, inevitably represents a disabling body for most people. In the Irish context, individual experience is losing its communal dimension, becoming isolated in a culture defined by consumption, a me-centred culture that leads to a retreat from the idea of a common civil space. Personal reality is now more and more defined by how many goods one consumes and gathers. Sharing contact and mutual participation run counter to the consumer ideal.
While the images they produce are undoubtedly, for example, the
He had not even a house at the time. The walls and
My own work has engaged in finding photographic ways of representing space. I perceive space not as a fixed site for playing out history, but as both produced by history, development, and as produced of history, uneven development. Perhaps my most interesting project to date involved a collaboration I instigated in Limerick, Ireland, between local unions, historians, journalists, politicians, and the art community, to commemorate a forgotten but important historical event, the Limerick Soviet, a general strike against British militarism in 1919. My contribution to this discourse, outside of administrative, was a series of photographs and videos, the Third Nature series, which I installed in a gallery there. The photographs are all made on a site that was important during the Soviet, but that also has a personal significance for me. My father, grandfather, and great-grandfather had all worked there on the canal barges. By using a flash gun, I set up a tension between the normally visible and what is possible to see in the photographs. The process itself, painting with a flash gun, is only possible if the photographer has is completely familiar with the space. These strategies make the photographs speak analogically of the space, now disused but full of meaning.
Civil culture is culture.
You may be wondering what my on-hand level for
The issues raised by the question, why have there been no great Irish artists, remain largely deflected by the predominant focus on individual artists' perceived success. In his introduction to sources in Irish art, Fintan Cullen suggested that the subsection on writings focused on individual artists might well have taken over the entire anthology. Given the extent to which lives of individuals and celebrity accounts of artists have dominated the historiography of Irish art history is apparently invested heavily in great artist myths. If we are to heed Linda Naughlin's observation that art historical monographs accept the notion of the great artist as primary and the social and institutional structures within which he lived and worked as secondary influences or background, this focus distracts from a consideration of a wider historical context outlined by John Clarke. However complex the imbrication of the history of the individual within the artwork, the bounding conditions set by the history of the state will not go away. This is because the state does not simply hold a field for cultural activities, of which art discourses are one type. It is everywhere and continuously intervenes in them. Contemporary neglect of the national and Irish art discourse, apparently reflecting international norms, overlooks the extent to which this relationship has been resolved historically in almost all other European contexts except Ireland.